Good morning, everybody. This is Lorraine.
And Jennifer.
And this morning, you may notice that the screen looks a little different. There's a little more purple and a slightly different logo.
New brand.
New brand. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And this new brand is not just the Small Biz Chat. It's also about my More Than a Few Words and the Toolbox. And we're going to talk about the thought process, the evolution of the brand, and maybe give you some tips on how you can think about your brand.
Yes, yes. I think to start words, just to put it out there, nobody probably hits the branding right off the bat when you start a company. It's just kind of like get something out there and it evolves into, something that really truly stands for who you are.
Well, and I was lucky because when I started Round Peg, I was working in a larger company and I had an amazing team of designers. And one of the guys created that original Round Peg brand. And
Interesting.
so there was a lot of thought about the fonts and the colors. And as a result, over the years, I adjusted the colors a little bit. But over 20 years, that brand served me really well.
I have a different story. So I can remember my first logo, and when I see it now, I'm just like, oh boy. And so it took me about 6 months in business before I had a true logo that I still stick with these days. Now my colors have changed, but
Mhm.
that logo has been around for at least the last 7 years and again has served me well.
And that's the thing is that it sometimes it feels like it's expensive to invest in the branding or oh, but I like this color and oh, I like that color. But when you have good branding
Yeah,
and you work with a good designer who gives you that format, it really makes your life so much easier. You don't have to think about other fonts. You don't have to think about other colors. And everything you build looks familiar.
correct. Yes, yes. That's the kicker there is that it's recognizable. That's what
Mhm.
a brand should do. And so the simple little thing of using different fonts on different marketing can make a difference in people really recognizing, who is this?
Absolutely. And, you know, when you're picking your font, and that's really one of the most important things, is you really need to look carefully at the font. How does it work in a variety of formats, not just your logo? And that's one of the things that I think a lot of companies make the mistake. They get a very quirky font, but then they try to use it in other places and they're like, ooh, no, no. And then they have to kind of back up and go, okay, now I have to find a font that looks like it, but is more useful.
I think a lot of mistakes I see is people not thinking about how that looks online and the places that you have to put it. For
Mhm.
instance, your social media channels, does it fit neatly into a little bubble or is it this like really long all the way across? I also think, that kind of plays into your naming per se. Sometimes a lot of people start businesses and they're like, oh, well, we're just going to do my last name.
Well, they do one of two things. We're going to do my last name. It's going to be, my husband's official business is the Ball Group because that, okay, whatever. It doesn't say a lot about who you are or what you deliver. And the other thing I see a lot and much more, no, I still think it's very common. People find a name for their business and then they realize they can't get the domain. And they're like, oh, well, then I can't name. Yes, you can.
Yes.
Yes, you can. Because if it's the name of your business, that has way more weight. Find something similar, related,
Yeah.
and that can be your domain name.
It's hard to get .coms anymore. I get that question a lot is, is it worth the 10,000? And I'm like, well,
You
I
know,
wouldn't do it, but
and it's like, uh, it's been years. I think 20 years ago when I was doing Startup Weekend, all the six-letter .coms were taken. Anything that was small and manageable, it was gone. So get over that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then as you look at your brand, use the font. I always tell people, write your name in whatever font you choose,
hmm hmm
because you're going to do that a lot.
yeah,
And so that's why in the very early days, round peg, and now if you look at the word small in small biz chat, see how the L's have a little bit of a
curve,
kind of a
yeah,
curve.
hmm
I was using a lot of lowercase back then. I'm using more upper and lower case
yeah,
now. But
yeah,
back then I was the E. E. Cummings of marketing. And
hmm
so if you do L Lorraine ball or L ball in most fonts, it looks like three straight lines.
You're correct. Yeah,
That's why over the years, my original logo in round peg was Trebuchet because it had that nice L.
yeah,
Um, the other thing I looked for back then that I don't have to care about anymore is um, round peg. The G had attitude. It wasn't just a straight line. It was one of those fun decoratives. So as you're picking your font, look at the words you're going to use most often. Think about what's going to be the titles on some of my social shares. What's going to be the titles on my pages, and how does it look in those fonts?
yeah, yeah. And what's the feeling you kind of get from it when you take a look at it?
Mm-hmm.
Which really, I mean, colors to me like is a big, big decision too. And I certainly feel like we made a mistake looking back now with some color choices that we've done. We had a pretty, I love the colors that we started with, and then at some point we entered in hot pink, and at the time, I was like, "Oh, well, this is fun because it's different." And then, it was really supposed to be a secondary color, but as the years started going on, it started to become this primary color. And then it was just like, why is this hot pink my primary color? And I was just like, it's time for something different.
And that's a big part of it. Is there is a difference between primary colors and what I call your accent colors.
Yeah,
And that was a huge thing for me. My blue and teal were always my primary colors. That was round peg. It was blue and teal and blue and blue and teal. That was us.
right.
And so when I sold round peg, more than a few words still had that dark blue, and the digital toolbox that still had the dark blue. And I thought, well, I'll let go of the teal, but I'll keep the blue because the blue is such a good workhorse color. It's good in the logo, it's good in text.
hmm
But as I looked at the logo and I'm thinking about kind of where my brand is going, I was disappointed because I wasn't that company anymore.
Yeah,
And I really decided earlier this year that I was going to change. I was going to break away. And so if you're looking today and you're thinking, do I need to adjust my screen? That's not the burgundy we've come to. No, it's not. It's not. And that blue looks a little light. Yes, it does. And that's because I've actually switched to these two colors, to this kind of a mid-tone blue instead of that dark blue,
yeah.
and this very vibrant purple.
I think also, another thing is you had three separate brands that you needed to pull together and have them actually look cohesive together versus before they didn't quite flow together.
Absolutely, because they all made sense with round peg, but they didn't necessarily make sense with each other. And when you take out the round peg, which was kind of the hub that held everything together, now you had the digital toolbox, you had more than a few words, and you had small biz chat kind of all floating out there. And
Yeah.
so what you're going to see as you see more of my branding going forward is I changed all the logos so that they all have some common elements and changed the fonts a little bit so they looked similar together. So
Can can you talk
I
about
can
the
actually.
process though of rolling out this new brand? Like what is this going to look like? Obviously today we're rolling it out here. How will you roll it out with the rest?
So I have always, and this is when I've done branding with small companies and with big companies, I've actually done a rolling change because the reality is, I mean, and I worked for Carrier Corporation. We were a Fortune
Yeah.
5
Large company.
company. Okay, not 500. United Technologies, our parent was Fortune 5. When we did a rebranding, there was no way to get every truck, every sign, everything changed. And
Yeah.
so I've actually started rolling it out slowly.
Mhm.
And you're just going to see, and probably you have already seen the new logo with the bubble, which is similar to the chat bubble in small biz. You're going to see the digital toolbox become the toolbox. You're
Mhm.
going to, most people probably won't notice the changes in font because I'm a font geek. You'll see the colors. And my goal is that by early January, everywhere you look, the only thing you'll be seeing are the new colors and fonts.
That's been an overwhelming thing for me is, we have a lot of content. And there are a lot of old blog posts still where the hot pink is still kind of part of that. And it's a slow process to try to transition those. And I've thought about that. Like, is it worth the time and effort to go back to old blogs and change all that, or just, leave it alone? It's fine.
You know what? My number one is leave it alone. It's fine until it's not. And here's the it's not. If you're doing good SEO and periodically you're going back to an old blog post and you're adding a little bit more content,
Yeah.
when you go to that page,
Change it.
change the branding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we've been doing. That's the method we've been taking. But every time I see it, I kind of cringe now when I see the hot pink. I'm like, oh no, we got to change that like now.
Well, but again, how many people are going back and seeing it? And brands mature. You know,
Mhm.
when I owned Round Peg, we went through our very white phase where you had the logo, but everything really looked more like the way the More Than a Few Words website looks now, where everything else was white and gray.
Mhm.
We went through our very dark blue phase where there was lots of dark blue banners.
Yeah.
The logo held it together. There was that continuity.
Yeah.
Um, but the reality is, a lot of those old pages do not get traffic.
Well, and the other point I want to bring up is sometimes you need a brand refresh because it's just it's not hitting the mark. It's boring. It's not who you are, like we've said, and it's just let's try something different and kind of get people to pay attention because I've definitely seen some rebrands that have been released where it was a big crash. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So, um, two things to keep in mind about branding, and we can go on. I mean, I could talk about branding for hours, but two things you got to remember. Number one, right about the time that you are sick of your branding is when people start noticing and recognizing it. So it takes
Yes.
years, people, to build that brand and build that recognition. So don't be changing your brand every 6 months, every year. No.
Yeah.
This is a change that was 20 years in the making. I had a brand for 20 years. I went through a bumpy transition period, but this is where I am now as long as these business entities exist. I'm done screwing with this. I got other things to work on.
Yep, yep. And I would just say one last tip is make sure you have a brand guideline so that when you have other people,
Mhm.
come into it, they know what they should be using.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things I gave you when I was like, okay, here's the new branding. It had all the colors, all the fonts, even instructions on when you use which fonts.
Yes, yes. Making it very easy that if somebody else was to come in, they know when to use that.
All right. So if it's time for you to work on your brand, if you just want someone to give you an opinion about that or any of your marketing, book an office hours with us. We'd love to chat.
Yes, we'd love to chat about it at digitaltoolbox.club. Take care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.